In the previous video I worked through the setting on the Screaming Tube guitar lead, and as promised I'm now going to show you how to turn it into the Screaming Dog of Beelzebub. Alright, maybe not, but I'm going to turn it into something a little bit more versatile and dynamic than the preset. Call up the Screaming Guitar program again and play some notes with switch 2 pressed down. Switch 2 is set to provide some sort of auto wah effect, and I suspect that this presumes that the user doesn't have a foot pedal attached to control the wah-wah effect manually. Obviously now everyone's seen my videos on AMS, they'll have rushed out to buy every available pedal and foot switch, and while the auto wah used, it's alright. It's nothing too exciting, so we'll change this and provide a wah setting with a bit more control using a foot pedal. I'll start by adding dive bomb pitch bends. Press the menu button and scroll down to the P pitch page. I've set the AMS setting to damper 64 and the amount to +12. Now if I play a note and hit my sustain pedal, you'll get a 1 octave upward pitch bend like this. So the pitch wheel is still covering a tone, but I've got that. Just by doing that, we're immediately into Van Halen country. Now the switch 2 setting isn't doing much, as we said, so let's change it so that it does something a bit more interesting. If you press the exit button and then from the main page go into the P input controller page and select the controllers tab, if you change the switch 2 setting to port SW65, we're going to put some portamento on the sound. I've pressed the menu key and scrolled back to the P pitch page again, and using the page plus button I've tabbed over to the porter tab. Using the arrow buttons and the enter button, tab around the screen and enable the portamento. When it's on, you'll see a tick next to where it says enable. Use the arrows to highlight the enable setting and the dial to switch it on and off. If there's a tick next to it, it's on. Tab down using the arrow buttons and tick the fingered setting in the same way. Change the mode to time instead of rate and set the time to 51. Now play a note and while holding it play another. Now do the same thing with switch 2 on. So you're creating an interesting effect with switch 2. Now this isn't particularly an effect you can get on a guitar, but who cares, you can use it on a synth and it will sound neat on a guitar sound anyway. And it's going to make a guitarist jealous, and it's a neat use of one of your available AMS sources. I'm not going to discuss the portamento settings I've used and what they do in detail because that's for another video. All I'll say is that at this stage you should play with the settings and they will each affect the glide speed between the notes and the way the notes glide. Now the preset is built on 2 oscillators, and while you can put portamento on just 1 oscillator, if you use the arrow buttons and tab up, highlight the OSC1 setting and turn the dial to make it change to OSC, you can apply the same portamento settings to oscillator 2 and it will reinforce the effect. Obviously you can also use different portamento settings so that each oscillator slides differently. Just to sum up at this stage, I've used switch 2 as an AMS source to provide portamento and the sustain pedal to act as an AMS source for changing or modulating the pitch. The pitch wheel is still set to provide up or down one-tone bends. The mod wheel is set to deliver vibrato as well as the feedback, and the feedback is coming from the second oscillator, which is detuned slightly. The next thing I'm going to do is set the foot switch to play everything an octave down when I press it. So I've got the sustain pedal capable of pushing everything up an octave. I'm going to be able to do the dive bomb pitch bend the other way with the foot pedal. Press the menu button, scroll down to the P pitch page yet again, change the OSC1 setting to OSC2. Scroll down to the AMS setting and set this to foot switch 82 and set the level to -12. Now at this stage you may need to tell the Kross what messages the foot switch is sending. This is because it can send a number of different messages from the foot switch and you need to assign a particular control setting to it. After all, this is alternate modulation. So press the global button, press the menu button and scroll down to the G input stroke control page. Using the page plus key, go to the foot tab, highlight the foot switch assign setting and make sure this is set to foot switch 82 if it isn't set there already. This will tell the Kross to send CC82 messages from the foot switch, and since the oscillators are set to react to CC82 messages, they'll change when the foot switch is pressed, and it will drop the pitch produced by oscillator 2 in this case by 1 octave. Now what you'll notice is that this isn't making much difference because that's only working really on oscillator 1. When I open the mod wheel and the volume of oscillator 2 is increased, you get that big pitch drop. Used with the sustain pedal, you've got some really clever ways of producing dynamic sounds. While you're on that page, make sure that the foot pedal assign is set to foot pedal CC04. This will be the next stage of the ultimate guitar lead patch when we get all Hendrix and add some wah-wah. We're going to control this from a rocker style foot pedal. Now hit the prog button and play some notes with the foot switch depressed. The foot switch is acting as an alternate modulation source that's working on a pitch parameter, which in this case is pitch setting of oscillator 2. To drop the pitch an octave, with the mod wheel fully open, this effect will be more pronounced as the volume of the oscillator is louder thanks to the filters, which we saw in the previous videos. Now we have this monster of a sound, we're going to mess with it even further by tweaking the effects. At this stage I'm going to save two versions of this patch. I'm calling one heavy guitar rhythm and the other heavy guitar solo. This is so I can mould two completely separate patches. While there aren't any rules, typically a heavy rhythm guitar sound shouldn't be as distorted or as laden with effects as a solo guitar sound. And we'll also make a few tweaks to the EQ on both to get them to sound more like a real rock guitar. The solo sound can be more effected and we can distort it even more, and I'll also add a wah-wah effect to that. If you see a real guitarist, unless they're an extreme metalhead, they will tend to use fairly semi-distorted rhythm sounds and crank up the volume, and often add a distortion effect like the famous tube screen pedal, the Proco rat effect or something like that, to make the solos louder and cut through the mix. That will also give you more harmonics and more overtone. They'll typically add more reverb and delay to a solo sound as well. I'm going to start using the heavy guitar rhythm sound to produce a more realistic rhythm guitar. Now the first thing I'll say about the guitar presets on the Kross is that they won't fool any half decent guitarists into thinking that they're real guitars. So let's try and change this. Don't expect miracles, because although the original samples on our starting point aren't that great, I'm about to prove that you can polish a turd, but it won't be particularly shiny. It will be better though. At this point I'll add that as a real guitarist I won't be making too great an effort with this. If I want guitars I'll play the real thing. However, I'll give you an idea of how to imitate the real thing and the settings that you ought to be looking at. Given more time I'm sure that you can come up with something better than me, and when you do, please post the sounds on the Kross Facebook site and I'll happily use them for my demos. Before I start messing with settings, I'm going to talk about playing guitar parts on a synth. If you're a keyboard player and have never played the guitar, then you're immediately at a disadvantage when trying to play guitar sounds. This is because the temptation is to use keyboard voicings and not guitar voicings in your playing, and keyboard playing styles rather than guitar playing styles. You may also struggle to find the tessitura, which is basically the sweet spot on the keyboard where samples are available that work best. Now the tessitura issue is particularly noticeable on nylon string guitars, where there's just one octave where you might just about convince a guitar player that you're playing a real guitar. The rest is a struggle because of the poor samples used and the limited number of samples. A program like Shreddage gets a bit closer to imitating a real guitar because it uses massive sample libraries. But even that won't convince a real guitar player, so perhaps we shouldn't expect too much. The strumming arpeggios available on the Kross are a prime example of a keyboard programmer programming guitars. No guitarist would use any of the preset guitar arpeggios, so if you want strumming, you'll need to construct your own arpeggios, and having had a brief look at how to do that, I'd immediately find an amp, a microphone, and start using a real guitar. Not only is it seriously complicated, it is also a very slow process that requires an understanding of both music theory and the workings of the Kross. Given time, I'm sure I could manage to get to grips with both, but as someone who is good enough to earn money playing the guitar, it's just not worth the effort. The problem with the distorted guitars on the Kross is that they sound like a wasp in a jam jar. Really fizzy. And if you're playing 3-note piano style chords with the root, third and fifth, they just don't work because they're just too distorted. A real guitarist won't use this voicing with a distorted sound anyway. In addition, the strummed arpeggios aren't much use if you're trying to imitate metal and rock style riffs. Here's Jumping Jack Flash by the Rolling Stones. You'll notice that I'm using 2-note 5 chords or power chords, and I'm using the key in a specific octave only. If you stray from this sweet spot, the samples really struggle, and I'm using the term sweet spot very lightly here. Guitarists love to use 5 chords made up of root, 5 and octave, or 5th, root and 5th above. The guitarist can also play the same note in a number of different places on the guitar neck, and therefore get different overtones. As a keyboard player, you can't do that. So there are limitations to what you can play and how you can play it. Although by using the mod wheel, you can at least add a little bit of realism by varying these settings. As I said, don't expect miracles, but we can get much closer to the real thing than the presets. And if we bury our guitars well enough in a mix, while it won't convince a guitar player that it's a real guitar, it might just convince the average Joe. The most obvious place to start working on the rhythm guitar patch is in the effects. Press the menu button and scroll down to the PMFX page. You'll notice that the preset has a phaser on it. Proof if it were needed that guitarists didn't program the Kross. As an occasional effect, the phaser might get used, but not as a permanent feature. Highlight the little box to the left of the screen and turn the dial to switch it off. Now the reverb is already set to my favourite plate reverb setting at 106, and the amount of reverb is about right to my ear. Now most guitar amps use a spring reverb, and there is one at MFX 109, although if you're going to use it, I suggest that you lower the return to about 40 to lose the boing that you get when you use a real spring reverb when it's wound up too far. I prefer the plate setting because it sounds more natural, and I'm going to use that to set the return to about 36. If you cover your rhythm guitar with too much reverb, this will mess with the separation between the guitar and the other instruments in a mix, so I've kept this quite low. The solo sound is a lot different, which is why I've saved 2 presets. A regular trick of producers is to pan a guitar sound hard left and pan a copy of that sound hard right. And if you've got too much reverb on this could prove really messy. So back off a little bit on the reverb on rhythm sounds. Now you could use filters to chisel away at the samples to create sounds that are closer to a real guitar. But we're going to use the tone controls that lie within the insert effects, as the ones used are specifically designed for guitars. So press the menu button and choose the PIFX page. In the IFX1 tab, you'll find a guitar amp and a PEQ4 effect has been used. This is basically a guitar amp simulator and a 4-band equalizer. For less of a heavy metal rhythm sound, I've adjusted the wet and dry mix setting to 38 by 62. Incidentally, you'll notice that an SRC control is in there, meaning you could control, or you could use AMS controllers such as a foot pedal to change the wet dry mix on the fly. This will mean that you can control whether the guitar simulation and EQ effect have more or less effect upon the sound. I'd rather use the foot pedal for something else, but if you've got something like an Alesis Vortex, you could assign one of the knobs to control this, for example. It depends on how many controls you have available, of course. I've changed the US modern amp setting to the less distorted UK modern sound and pushed the middle setting up to 83 on the amp. I've also reduced the presence control to 60. This will muddy the sound slightly to remove some of the ugly high-end fizz. The EQ settings will allow you to add or remove the emphasis on certain frequencies. The highest frequencies will tend to emphasise the fizz that you get with the transistorised amps and that you don't get with valve amps loved by most guitarists. As I've said, I haven't got any need to go mad with these settings as I have a real guitar I can use. But the different amp and EQ settings will allow you to shape the sound and find something closer to a real guitar than I've managed to. So go play with it. The preset we're using also has a speaker simulator attached. Press the Page Plus button and you'll find this on Insert FX3, IFX3. As any guitarist will tell you, the speaker colours the guitar tone as much as the amplifier. Now the trim setting is basically a gain setting. That's going to add some distortion. Now I've reduced that to 78 and it takes away more of that filth. I've also changed the speaker setting to Tweed 1x12. Now the Tweed is a 12-inch speaker cabinet used in old Fender amps, and the simulator is trying to imitate it. Again, set this to taste and for particular sounds that you want, but don't expect it to sound like Clapton or Page. Pressing the Page Plus button will take you to IFX4, and this contains a 7-band graphic equalizer. Again, adjust each of the bands to taste. Pressing the Page Plus key will take you to IFX5. There is a limiter on here. What this does is stop the volume going over a certain peak and limits transients. This will keep the volume of your playing level nice and even, limiting volume increases where you hit the keys really hard. Now press the menu key and scroll to the prog page. Using the Page Plus buttons, tab to the Tone tab. In addition to the tone controls we've just seen in the master and insert effects, we can change the basic content of the tone here by using a filter. Scroll down to the cutoff setting and experiment with the level. I've set it to +6 and below set the resonance level to 7. You'll notice that sounds a little bit thinner now. And really it's probably nearer Money for Nothing by Dire Straits than it is to the Rolling Stones, but it's certainly less heavy metal. Again, fiddle with the settings, mess with the EQ, and you should be able to come up with something that's a bit better than that, given time. When a producer records guitars nowadays, the tendency is to record one and pan it hard right, and then make a copy. EQ that slightly differently and pan it hard left. Now you could do this with a combi or using the audio recorder or sequencer to record it. Try it, it might work or it might not. Basically the sounds on this aren't great for producing really heavy rock rhythm guitars. At some point it's my intention to sample real guitar and use that sample as a starting point, but that's for another video. I've already given you a really useful organ sound, and if you add that to your mix you have the tools to build a classic rock band, and you can hide the guitars probably somewhere behind the organ, unless of course you can manage to EQ something that sounds like a Les Paul through a Marshall JCM 800 amplifier. Let's go back to the lead sound. We already have the sustain pedal providing an octave up and the switch providing an octave down and portamento. Press the menu button and scroll to the PMFX page. Using the Page Plus and the Page Minus buttons, tab over to the Setup tab. Select the D11 multi-tap chorus delay setting. Ideally I would have liked to use this with a reverb, but the Kross falls short on this one and you can't use a long delay with a reverb. Set the return level to 119 and tab over to the MFX1 tab. The delay settings are a matter of personal taste, and of course it's what fits with the song. Now a favourite trick of producers is to set the repeats to sync to the beat of the song. However, there are no rules. Now a short slapback echo of 150 milliseconds is characteristic of the Elvis Presley twangy type of guitars of the 50s, and for a more rock sound you could use the 420 milliseconds that I tend to use. Now the longest delay is 650 milliseconds. Again, this makes it too short for the Brian May Brighton rock impersonations, which needs 800 milliseconds. Again, this is annoying, but I've got the Korg Chaos pad that will add longer delays, and I could always do it on guitar. I've set the first delay tap to 420 milliseconds and the depth has been changed to 30. I've also backed the LFO setting down to the minimum of 0.02. This is virtually removing the chorus effect. I've set the feedback level to +14 and turned the SRC off. It was set to mod wheel, but with this setting the sound is dry with the mod wheel closed, and it's only when you push the mod wheel that you get the delay cutting in. Now with no reverb available, that's not a great sound, so I've turned that off. Again, you could use an AMS source such as a pedal or a switch to bring in and adjust the wet and dry mix, but I've set this completely to wet and the SRC is off. This will give you a basic lead sound. I'm now going to add a wah-wah effect, but I'm also going to add a high gain wah-wah setting, so you're going to get a bit more grunt on this solo. Press the menu button and go to the PFX routing page and tab to the IFX tab. Ensure that the first insert effect is activated. The box next to number 1 should have a black square inside it. Select the S20 OD high gain wah setting. Make sure that the box before the second right facing arrow is ticked so that the effect is feeding the second effect. Set the second effect setting to S26 tube preamp model, and again make sure that the box to the right is also ticked so that effect 3 is available. Now I'm going to set effect 3 as the compressor. That's a stereo compressor S01. Now the high gain wah will add more distortion as well as wah-wah. The tube preamp will provide a more valve-like amp sound, although don't expect miracles, and the compressor will fatten the sound a little. I won't touch the setting in effects 1 and 2 as they sound okay as they are, and there's a whole series of videos to be had probably from the master and effects inserts alone. This isn't really the place for this, so press the menu button and select the PIFX page and we'll adjust the wah effect. First thing to do is make sure that the wah effect is switched on and set the SRC source to pedal 04 and the switch to toggle. It'll work well with momentary, but it's better with toggle, I think. And set the wah sweep SRC to pedal 04 as well, so it's switching off and on when the pedal cuts in. I've also set the mode to high gain, so you get more filth on there. But other than that, I've left it pretty much as is. Obviously you can mess with the individual settings on the wah, but it's up to you. So I've now got a guitar with portamento. I've got a guitar that will mute with switch 1. I've got a guitar that will do a tone bend and will produce feedback with a mod wheel and vibrato. It will provide wah-wah that goes like that with the sustain pedal and goes so I've got some really silly effects going off there that are really dynamic and controllable. Before I finish, I'm going to show what can be done with the effects. Now this is my best Bon Jovi preset. It uses the talking modulator effect with the voices changed by the mod wheel. And this is my Trevor Rabin Owner of a Lonely Heart impersonation. This features the pitch shifter set to produce a harmony a fifth above the root. Big country sound, which is a pitch shifter set to an octave. Finally, this is the lead sound used by Steve Howe on the Yes album Relayer. It should sound familiar from the previous video as that triangle feedback tone. It's got loads of delay on it, and the mod wheel is opening the filter as before to bring the level up and down. The original was played on a pedal steel guitar with the volume pedal used to remove the attack portion of the sound, and it was laced with delay. As I suggested at the start of this video on guitars, although these are guitar patches, the AMS and effect settings can be used as a template for other sounds. So if you go to the P oscillator page and start setting the samples differently, you can use these AMS settings and transfer them from the guitar with minimal alterations to work on synths. Obviously you'll need to remove the guitar effects in the insert and the master effects, change them to something else, but you can basically use these ideas so you've got hands-on controls on synths and guitar sounds. One other thing that you can do is use different samples at different velocities. For each oscillator you can use 4 samples. Supposing that you set different sounds to come in when you strike the key faster or slower, this can add to the expressiveness of the playing. So you've got alternatives. I'm going to finish off with my mangled guitar patch, which features the screaming guitar preset mangled in this way. An obvious question is, how does AMS apply in combis? Well, when you include the saved programs in a combination, many of the AMS controls that you've set may remain. However, at the very least you'll lose the master effects settings, and you can expect some weird things if you create a split, for example, with one sound that has switch 1 set to do X and another that has it set to do Y. I haven't gone anywhere near combis yet, so that's something else to examine. Anyway, in a very big nutshell, thanks for watching. That's AMS, and I'm off for a lie down.